have a special guest with us that's going to say stuff that you're probably not allowed to say in America. It's like China, but we call it YouTube. Anyway, it's Dr. Peter McCullough. He's an internist, cardiologist, epidemiologist who has been a leader in the medical response to COVID-19. He's published dozens of peer-reviewed papers on COVID-19 and commented on the medical response in countless media outlets. He's also testified repeatedly in the United States Senate and several state legislatures. His latest book, there it is, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality, a sweeping, meticulously documented expose that challenges the untouchable narrative surrounding vaccines. Welcome back to the show, Dr. McCullough.
Jimmy, so great to be back on. You know, you were the only person who made me laugh during the dark times of the pandemic. And the pandemic keeps going on. You know, I just rushed across town in Dallas. I was in the Fox studio. I was on Fox Primetime with Liz McDonald on Fox Business just after Trump's press conference, which I ended up watching the whole thing with Tim Cook, historic times for Trump and what he's doing for us in terms of business and economic development. But, you know, my comment was about RFK slashing messenger RNA vaccines for future pandemics in the BARDA unit. And I supported RFK completely on this.
And so tell me about that. Tell me about what's wrong with, because the people are making a big stink out of this, like it's a bad thing that, you know, RFK promised he wouldn't take vaccines away, and now here he is taking the $500 million for mRNA vaccines that are supposed to be used for later pandemics. He's taking that away. So tell me why he did that and why you support it.
Well, yeah, I can tell you in my first book, it's interesting how these come about. My first book, Courage to Face COVID-19, you know, we highlight that under Obama, Dr. Rick Bright was installed as the BARDA director. BARDA is our pandemic response unit in the United States. It's part of the NIH. And Rick Bright broke protocol and actively went out and undermined Trump's and our early success with hydroxychloroquine in order to shuttle $483 million to Moderna for the messenger RNA vaccine. I mean, so BARDA was ripe with corruption. And when I reviewed it tonight on national TV, I said, listen, I've looked at what they've done. What they did with in vitro diagnostics and therapeutics with monoclonal antibodies was fine. But the vaccine should never be a primary response for a highly infectious and widely prevalent pandemic. Because when everyone takes a vaccine, the virus is going to see that and quickly mutate, outsmart the vaccine, and then the vaccinated will transmit it to the vaccinated. That's exactly what happened, and it's prolonged the pandemic. With no vaccination, this pandemic should have been done in about 2 years, like the Spanish flu.
And so you can't vaccinate your way out of a pandemic like that, right? That's correct?
That's right. The mistake is to feature vaccines as the primary countermeasure. Now, vaccines could play a role on the back end or a limited role, let's say, for nursing home patients and congregate living individuals, you know, according to what the Great Barrington Declaration was thinking, but never to mass vaccinate everyone in the country. You know, USA Facts has it down now that I think 81% of Americans took at least one shot.
Yeah, I took 2 and I got vaccine injured, wasn't good. And I still have to worry about that for the rest of my life, or at least another 6 years. You know, people like to say when I bring up COVID and the vaccines and all that has come out about the COVID policy, the official COVID policy not being science-based whatsoever. And people go to me, oh, you're still talking, COVID's over. And I'm like, well, you know, it takes probably usually 10 years to find out what the actual side effects of a novel vaccine are. And we're not even 5 years, we're only 4 years into that right now. So we're not even halfway through. We don't even know what all the side effects are going to be because it takes 10 years. Am I wrong to say something like that?
Yeah, I testified in Congress about a year ago, and based on the FDA guidance on this for a genetic product like Pfizer and Moderna, it's about 5 to 15 years of observation. So we're working carefully in my office in Dallas. We're working with the research lab in Germany. We now have evidence that the messenger RNA is still in the body 3.2 years after the shots, and the spike protein is still being produced. We found messenger RNA inside white blood cells actually in the skin and skin biopsies. And, this is greatly concerning. The CDC told us, listen, this was just a shot in the arm. The body clears it out quickly.
Yeah.
But this is what I mean in our book about taking vaccines based on faith. In our book, we highlight that this isn't the first time where people were said, listen, just take it. This is the best we can do. It's back in the smallpox era, and then Louis Pasteur had several vaccines that he tried, known for the rabies vaccine. But there's a hubris here, and there's a pressure that people feel to take it based on faith, not on science.
So your book is super interesting because you talk about how vaccines became this sacred cow in the West, and let me just read a little bit of that. Right, vaccines, mythology, ideology, and reality tells the story of this technology and the celebrated men who developed it with some success, but also with failures that are never mentioned in the celebratory literature on vaccines. Vaccine advocates often proclaim that they, quote, follow the science, but most vaccine development has been a matter of guesses, gambles, and wild experimentation. Its key figures have been biased by religious faith, wishful thinking, ideology, and a desire for recognition and money. Though credit is due to some vaccines for reducing infectious disease morbidity and mortality, their contribution to public health in developed nations has been grossly over-exaggerated by propaganda. Dramatic improvements in nutrition and sanitation were the primary drivers of this trend. The authors do not dismiss the concept of vaccination, but seek to promote a more informed and less dogmatic discussion about its risks and benefits. Critical evaluation can only make the technology safer and more effective. So, can you talk a little bit about how when the first vaccines that were ever made, and of course the smallpox vaccine, which people still think was a wild success, but if you do a little digging on it, which you've done, you find out that it was the opposite. It wasn't. And in fact, I've read other articles that talked about how people in towns revolted against the smallpox vaccine because they saw the damage it was doing to their children. So take it wherever you want to take it.
We found some early evidence in Africa and actually in Turkey of some experimentation with some measure of what's called inoculation. But we pick up the story 1721 with Cotton Mather. Jimmy, you're going to love this one. Cotton Mather is a Puritan minister in Boston, and he is working with Dr. Boylston on variolation. So it's actually taking a little bit of pus out of one of the smallpox blisters in one child and injecting it into the next child. And Cotton Mather proclaims that this is a gift from God. Right off the bat. Now, interesting, Cotton Mather also played another role. He was a consultant to the judges in the Salem witchcraft trial. So he also believed in witches. But this thing takes off. Ben Franklin initially was critical. Then little Frankie dies of smallpox. And Ben Franklin says, oh, maybe we should do this. And so he gets behind this. And, it starts to take off. And then Edward Jenner comes in about 50 years later. He attempts to use, some material from cowpox to inoculate against smallpox. Now, keep in mind, they had no idea that it was a virus or a bacteria. They had no idea what was causing this. And Edward Jenner, initially his first paper, he was a member of the Royal Society. It was rejected by the Royal Society. He just kind of published it on his own. But he does pick up fame and fortune, and things progress for him. Now, King George III and his wife had 15 kids. And as you pointed out, 2 kids got vaccinated. They died of the smallpox vaccine because contaminated with staph and strep and syphilis, tetanus. And they still promote vaccination for the people of England. Maybe they thought, listen, the other 15 kids survived if they took it, and losing 2 isn't bad, or 13 survived, 2 lived. We don't know, but I can tell you early on we saw this recipe of public fear tremendous hubris by the vaccine developers, claiming it works, and they were all claiming greatness, the brilliance of mankind. A lot of power, and then money. From the very beginning, it was like that. And I challenged some of my French colleagues who've already read it. I said, who is more arrogant, Louis Pasteur or Anthony Fauci?
Yeah, I would say Anthony Fauci. So, you also in your book. Let me just talk a little bit more from your book. You talk about how the sacred cow got its name, which you just kind of told us about them. And he said, for decades, vaccines have been unreasonably presented to the public as above critical scrutiny. As Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor noted in her dissenting opinion in the case of Brussowitz versus Wyeth LLC, the insulation of vaccines from legal liability has resulted in little incentive to improve them. So what was it what opened your eyes to the problem of vaccines being a sacred cow and not being able to be criticized, which would only make them better, right? So if you were able to have open debate and criticize vaccines and have stronger placebo testing, it would make the vaccines better. So tell me, what was it that opened your eyes?
Yeah, I have to tell you, I didn't have strong views on vaccines over the course of my career. I had taken all the vaccines. I traveled to a jungle one time. I took additional vaccines. My wife did. My kids took all the vaccines. So I broadly accepted vaccines, probably like you did and everyone else.
Yeah.
But when the COVID-19 vaccine campaign rolled out, remember, we only had 1 month of taking the 2 shots, the primary series, and 2 months of observation. That's it. No one could have known on month 4, 5, and 6 what would happen. And yet it was presented to us as safe and effective, and that we're going to go with this. Just last hour on Fox News, they played that ill-fated clip from Rachel Maddow, who says, well, you take the vaccine and it stops the virus in its tracks, and she's going on and on. And there's no way she could have known that. No one knew that. She was accepting this based on faith, not on science. I mean, a fair presentation would be, listen, we don't know if this is going to work. We don't know if this is going to last, but we're going to give it a shot, and here's the reason why. It was never presented to us that way. And, with a few months into this, Anthony Fauci comes on TV and says, the vaccines aren't working. We need to start taking boosters. Let me tell you, a couple months after you take your first set of shots, you're told you need a booster. I mean, that's prima facie evidence the vaccines weren't working. But so instead of being honest with us, and governments all over the world did this, they doubled and quadrupled down on people. And before you know it, people are losing their jobs, and America was heading into vaccine misery.
I was shocked at the people who I expected to stand up against this didn't. The people who claimed to be the champion of workers, because people were being fired by the hundreds of thousands across the country for not taking an experimental medical treatment, or they couldn't go to work, or they couldn't go to college, or they couldn't travel, or they couldn't go eat at a restaurant. They couldn't have freedom of movement. They wouldn't even let people go surfing here in California. They would arrest them. So I was so surprised at the people who didn't stand up for workers. 41. I had Cornel West on my show, and I showed him 41% of black-owned businesses were closed permanently because of the non-scientific shutdowns, and it was just like water off a duck's ass that he couldn't care. Like none of those. But so were you shocked to see how nobody stood up? I know that there was a big price to pay. I paid a big price for sure in Hollywood for having skepticism about the vaccine and the COVID narrative. Were you surprised at how only a handful of people like you stood up and said something?
For sure. I mean, where was the ACLU on this? They went into hiding for 5 years, and they came out on this transgender madness. But where were they? You said minority businesses closed down. Overall, 60% of businesses that were shut down during the pandemic never reopened. People's lives were ruined. The thousands of military men and women in uniform who didn't want to take the vaccine. They're trying to save their own lives, and they walked away. Very few of them came back, and their lives were fundamentally changed. I know mine. I didn't take the vaccines in my life. The arc of my career was fundamentally changed. There's about 2,000 doctors in France who are permanently sidelined on this. Untold numbers of nurses, about 1,000 in Australia. To this day, they haven't been restored.
And so how did you manage to keep your license and navigate these censorial, oppressive measures that have been taken on truth tellers and doctors who are skeptics?
It took a lot of, legal resources, sadly, dollars spent in court. I had to staunchly defend. I have a perfect clinical track record. I'm one of the most published doctors in medical history in my area of heart and kidney disease. Now I'm one of the most published doctors in acute COVID-19. I've testified on Capitol Hill. I cite the evidence with great precision. No one's actually ever challenged what I've said regarding, the pandemic from the very beginning to where we are now. But the attacks came in from New York Times, LA Times, credentialing agencies, boards, and most of this was essentially a professional smear campaign. And I was certainly kept my medical licenses, changed my board certifications. I'm in practice here in Dallas. But these attempts at professional injury are very similar to another time. And that was around 1949 when Sir Austin Bradford Hill and Dr. Dowley in England presented the data that smoking caused lung cancer. All the doctors smoked. All the nurses smoked. Everybody in the White House smoked and on Capitol Hill. And you know what they said? No, smoking's safe and effective. In fact, American Tobacco had campaigns with doctors. So did Reynolds. And the tobacco industry tried to destroy these guys, decredential them, smear them. Yeah, it happened for smoking. This went all the way to 1964. Luther Terry, Surgeon General, calls the doctors into Washington and says, listen, guys, I got bad news for you. Smoking causes lung cancer. You should have seen the look on these doctors' faces. They were all smoking. And then it wasn't until 1972 where the AMA sheepishly starts its first campaign about the medical hazards of smoking.
Really?
So, Jimmy, listen, that's, over 2 decades, 3 decades. I'm telling you right now, doctors don't change quickly when they're wrong. They've been wrong on some big issues in medicine and COVID-19 vaccines. Most of them are just now, I think, shamefully silent. You don't see any chiefs of medicine coming out and saying, wow, these vaccines are so good, we should be taking more. Most of them are completely silent.
But it's amazing the amount of corruption that's not only in, say, the medical journals, right? We know that. So the medical journals that all take big pharma money, they're all corrupt. The editors of medical journal. I mean, I'm talking about the British Medical Journal. I'm talking about the New England Journal of Medicine. All the top ones completely corrupted, and that was revealed. It's manifest through the COVID situation. But people, don't also realize that the boards are also corrupted, right? So what they'll do is the big pharma will give a lot of money to the head of a board, and that's how they infiltrate and corrupt a medical board. And like, for instance, the American Pediatric Association is fighting against RFK, who right now took away the recommendation for babies and children to get the COVID boosters. And so they're fighting against him, and they're not doing that on the basis of science, right? They're doing that on the basis of they're corrupt, correct?
That's right. They have ties to industry. And listen to this one. A group that went after me was the American Board of Internal Medicine. Mm-hmm. Now, I've been continuously certified, multiple exams, perfect track record, both medicine and cardiology. In fact, they rely on my research for some of the board questions. So I had a scintillating career before the pandemic. They went after me after my Texas Senate testimony for violating a new COVID misinformation policy. They came out later on. So, they went back in time and said, you violated our policy. Now they went ex post facto. I mean, they violated every aspect of fair evidence. And, we found out that their CEO, Richard Barron, who's now retired. He was showing up at an Austin meeting, South by Southwest, with Weber Shandwick. Weber Shandwick is the PR and marketing firm for Pfizer and Moderna. Rand Paul called him out because Weber Shandwick had an installed marketing unit in the CDC vaccine office.
Yeah.
He wrote a letter to Rochelle Walensky. Anyhow, Weber Shandwick and Pfizer and Moderna, obviously have billions of dollars to work with. They teamed up with the American Board of Internal Medicine to go after me and other people who were just raising our clinical concerns regarding the vaccines.
So there's so much good stuff in this book. You give the history of how vaccines came to be, the first big vaccines, the smallpox vaccine, and how people attributed a lot more healing to these vaccines that actually should have been attributed to just better sanitation and better food safe. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we highlight some wonderful civil engineers who made a huge impact in these big cities. And they get no credit for this. Water treatment and sewage diversion. And all of these diseases were markedly going away and deaths were going away before the vaccines ever came out. 90% reductions in these communicable diseases like diphtheria and pertussis. Even polio was way, way down before the polio vaccine ever rolled out. Measles mortality had plummeted. And it's all because of better hygiene, better food, sanitation, better living conditions. Smallpox was spread by kids sleeping with each other in the same bed. So I just washing bed sheets, separating children when they're sick. Yellow fever as an example, learning to quarantine. Quarantine was actually very effective, quarantining the ship. The yellow fever vaccine came out 37 years after the last yellow fever outbreak. So all these vaccines come in very late, but then historians kind of change history and say, that the vaccines are what actually made these diseases go away. Now, we give credit to the vaccines. They have reduced various illnesses, but there's no free lunch. Let me give you an example, Jimmy. You and I as kids, we probably had chickenpox. Do you have chickenpox?
Yes.
Yeah, so I had it too, but my kids didn't because they had the chickenpox vaccine. But now there's 5 studies showing if you take the chickenpox vaccine as an adult, you have a higher risk of shingles.
Really?
Yes. And you know what? Now there's shingles vaccines that people have to take.
Oh, okay. And I know people who claim that an adverse event from the COVID vaccine was shingles. Have you heard that?
Yeah, well, I've seen that in my practice for sure. And anybody who's taken a COVID shot, if they start to get some pain or some itching, particularly on the flank area, get on it right away. We can treat it with valacyclovir and prednisone, but we got to start early. The shingles vaccine is far from perfect. In fact, I took it myself, but I wouldn't recommend it. I think the reactions are too severe. It's 14 times the viral loading dose of the chickenpox vaccine. It's a huge shot in the arm.
So here's some more from your book. So we're talking about smallpox vaccine. This is very interesting. So there is no scientific evidence that Jenner's smallpox vaccine was safe and effective. In the UK, the worst smallpox outbreak in the country's history struck in 1871 to 1873 after, like you said, 70 years of widespread vaccination and almost 20 years of universal compulsory vaccination mandated by Parliament in 1853. So they had this. And so nobody can put this 2 and 2 together. Like, hey, we've been giving out these vaccines forever, and now we're having a huge outbreak, which is what clued me into the lack of efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine, because the communities that had the highest uptake of the vaccine would often have the biggest outbreaks. And so, do you want to talk a little bit more about the smallpox or no?
Well, yeah, the smallpox vaccine, remember, they didn't know the cause of smallpox. You couldn't look under the microscope and see a virus or a bacteria. So they simply didn't know. So when they took the fluid from horses or cows, they couldn't possibly know if they even had an active vaccine, let alone did they administer it in a way to confer immunity. And this got so bad that people would die of a staph or strep infection or syphilis or tetanus, that people started to say, listen, it's not working, and people are dying from this. that there's a city in England, Leicester, England, where they said, listen, we're not taking it. And it led to the British Anti-Vaccination League. That's the word, Anti-Vaccination League. And they said, listen, we're not taking it. And they actually had fewer cases of smallpox, as just as a case example of not working. So there were tremendous debates back then. People said it's useless, it's dangerous. Now, over time, the smallpox vaccine did get refined. You probably took it, Jimmy. I took it myself. And I think the modern smallpox vaccine that was ultimately phased out in 1976, the last versions of it were reasonably safe. But by that time, we had figured out how to wash bed sheets and have proper linens. And there really is no threat of smallpox out there now just because of improved hygiene.
So here's just to reiterate what you already said. In the U.S., mortality from all infectious diseases except polio had already declined by over 90% between 1900 and 1948. And that's because of things like cleaner water, better sewage system. And then that's when the era of mass vaccination began, after a 90% drop in all that. And so this is the stuff that people don't know about. People think they just attribute everything to the vaccines, and they don't attribute anything to the actual cause of the reduction in those infectious diseases, which was better quality of food, better sanitation, better water supply, all those things. And here, we've talked about this a lot on the show, about the flu vaccine. And it looks like the flu vaccine, the last one anyway, had negative efficacy, meaning that if you took the flu vaccine, you were way more likely to get sick with the flu than if you didn't take it. 27% more likely to become infected and sick with the flu than the people who did not take the flu vaccine. So not only does it not do anything, it actually makes you more likely to become sick. And here's, you have a quote from Dr. Fauci in 1922. He said, in 2022, in an academic paper, he said, none of the predominantly mucosal respiratory viruses, influenza, SARS-CoV-2, RSV, have ever been effectively controlled by vaccines. This was an admission that the massive vaccination campaigns against influenza and SARS-CoV-2 have had little to no public health value, though they have yielded vast profits to the vaccine manufacturers. How long now? We showed in 2006, they knew this, that the NIH did a study and CBS News reported it, that the more vaccine uptake for the flu that elderly people had, you would think that their death rate would go down from the flu, but it didn't. It actually kept rising. And so they've known this for at least 20 years, if not longer. And here he is admitting that. How long do you think it's going to take for the general public to start to be skeptical about these vaccines?
Oh boy, the flu shot is an abject failure. I counted up, Jimmy, I took 40 flu shots to be on staff at hospital. I mean, I was forced into it, essentially. I didn't think much of it.
Steph.
I took 40. And if you noticed a few years ago, I'd go on national TV. I've been on ABC, and I'm a frequent contributor to Fox. And I was sick all the time. I had a handkerchief. I got to the point where I was sick continuously from taking all these flu shots. Now there's randomized trials showing what you said is exactly right. You take a flu shot, you actually have an increased risk of lots of common colds. And the recent paper you're citing from the Cleveland Clinic, Shretha and colleagues, show the people taking the flu shot, it backfires and they get more influenza. So, now the flu shot has made it into pregnant women, little babies down to age 6 months. I mean, this is an example where this just needs to be suspended. It doesn't work. And you know what? If you read the package insert, this is pretty scary. It happened to a friend of my brother's. If you read the package insert on the flu shot, one of the side effects is that for sure it causes Guillain-Barré syndrome or paralysis. You could end up on the mechanical ventilator and bedridden the rest of your life from a flu shot and get nothing out of it.
I know someone who actually died of Guillain-Barré syndrome.
Oh.
So I got a flu shot. The last time I got a flu shot was, I think, somewhere around 2015. And my arm still hurts No kidding. So it hurt really bad for at least 2 years, 3 years. And now it still comes and goes. And it's all over, not just my arm, but my shoulder. And so that's when I swore off taking the flu vaccine. But then, of course, I fell for the propaganda doctor over COVID. And they made me convinced that if I got COVID, it was going to go to my bones because I have a bone disease that's incurable that can only be treated. And that it was going to go to my bones. It's going to go to your weakest organ and kill you. And so I fell for it. So even though I had sworn off taking the flu vaccine, I took this new experiment like a dummy, and I paid the price for it. That's for sure.
Jimmy, you know what happened? I wrote a Substack on this in Focal Points. Everybody should subscribe to Substack Focal Points so you can get these updates. But what happened in your arm was real with the flu shot. And you know what happened is they hit the nerve.
Oh.
And so, yeah, when they inject it right into the nerve, you can end up with permanent pain and discomfort.
What do you think it could be from aluminum granulomas? Is that how you say it?
No, it's got a particular eponym. I'll look it up, but no, it's from hitting the nerve, and the nerve, of course, radiates pain up to the shoulder and down. That's what it's due to, sadly.
Okay.
Now, the last flu shot I took, I did get the package insert. I was starting to get clued in on this. I think it was 2021. And you know what? The last flu shot they gave me, it was one of the 4% that has mercury in it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they finally just outlawed those. It was 4% of flu shots had mercury. Sure enough, that's the last one I got. It's kind of like, kicking me in the butt out the door. Jimmy, I don't know about you. I'm not taking any more vaccines.
Yeah, no, I'm done. No, especially after I, read some of your book, and I've read lots of other articles about vaccines, and I've, people like Pierre Corey has written about them, and that book Turtles All the Way Down, and there's lots of information, like just mind blowing, and it's just, it all comes from this here. You talk about in your book. The Congress passed the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, granting liability protection to vaccine manufacturers, was based on a highly questionable, if not plainly erroneous, rationale. While measures should be taken to limit unfounded lawsuits, blanket liability protection for vaccine manufacturers is not in the interest of public health. And so it's amazing how people have been conned into thinking that there's a manufacturer of a product that causes injury that needs to have blanket immunity from lawsuits, and people will get mad at you if you say you should take that away. Why shouldn't Big Pharma have to defend their product in court like they have to defend every other product? They've had lots of products that have been recalled, lots of products that killed people, and you're not stopped for. So, how do you think? Where do you see people's minds going in the next? Do you think people will wake up to this, and do you think we'll ever take away that blanket immunity for this highly? Just go ahead. What do you think?
Well, I tell you what, their eyes are going to be open when they read our chapter on this, very brief, about Dr. Jonathan Polling. And you can't believe this. This guy is a neurologist at Johns Hopkins. He has a perfectly normal daughter. And she takes a huge battery of vaccines, and within about 3 months, she has a bad reaction. And then within about 3 months, she has fulminant autism. She's destroyed by this. And he carefully chronicles this. He writes it up as a peer-reviewed case report. I mean, this is scientifically as clean as possible. Turns out she has an underlying genetic mitochondrial abnormality that may have predisposed her. So he's one of the test cases in this omnibus for the first vaccine injury compensation, about 5,000 cases. He's one of them. And you know what? The federal lawyers look at this and they pull his case out and they cut a deal with him. We still don't know what type of deal he got. And once they get him out as a test case, then they dismiss all the other 5,000 cases. So, not related. And so Polling is no longer at Johns Hopkins. He's down in Athens, Georgia. We want to talk to him. But this is dirty business. This vaccine injury compensation, there was no intentions of giving people compensation. And you're right, this blanket immunity now has been a green light for these vaccine companies to cut every corner under the sun, get as many vaccines on the market. It's a massive, massive market, probably $100 billion or more. Government pays for most of these vaccines. This is gravy for the companies. And so I think a huge step would be to rescind the 1986 Vaccine Injury Compensation Act, let the companies defend their own products. And I guarantee if that happened tomorrow, the companies would pull a huge number of vaccines off the market because A, they're not medically necessary or clinically indicated, and they're only going to offer liability for the company.
So again, the history that you give on vaccines and how they came to be, this sacred cow that you can't question is just really fascinating. And here's some more of it. The history of vaccination from the variolation, is that how you say it? Mm-hmm. Campaign in Boston in 1721 to the COVID-19 vaccination campaign in 2021 is riddled with dubious experiments, glaring biases, shoddy reasoning, major safety issues such as the polio vaccine cutter incident in 1955, as well as numerous acts of fraud and chicanery. Could you tell people about that? We've talked a little bit about it on the show before, but can you explain what the cutter incident was with the polio vaccine?
Almost all of these vaccines, when they come out, are grossly unsafe. And then they're refined over time. So, when the polio vaccines came out, you probably remember this, Jimmy. The first ones I took as a kid were the little sugar cubes. Remember those?
I don't.
Yeah, well, I took the sugar cubes. Well, they actually provided some immunity from invasive polio, but it added more polio to the water supply because it comes out in stool. So I remember taking all these, and then they said, whoa, you need to come in and now take new polio vaccines. So me and my brothers went in for the polio shots, and the polio shots were a live attenuated virus, or a killed virus, that was grown on monkey kidney cells. And they clumped together at Cutter Labs, and so the formaldehyde didn't kill all the polio virus. Oh, now we got a problem. Now kids got injected with live polio virus. And sure enough, there was a huge number of cases of polio. Kids got paralyzed from the vaccine. Polio was already cleared out of the water supply by that time because we had good, water treatment, what have you. So this was a disaster. Another thing that happened, this happened to me, was later on it became known the polio vaccines were contaminated with SV40 or simian virus 40.
And that causes cancer, right?
Yeah, it causes cancer. So you know what? During the years when they were giving it out, I was in that year, one of my shots, I'm sure I got SV40. So to this day, the Institute of Medicine says, well, we don't know if this is going to cause cancer in adults or not, but I wonder how many people my age have cancer because they took the polio shots that were contaminated.
And you're not allowed to talk about this stuff, right? Isn't that, to me, that's the most chilling thing, is that even, people at the top of their professions cited, and one of the most cited doctors in the world, you're shunned, shamed, and censored. If you had a question about this, you're considered a kook and a crazy. You're considered an outlier. I forget what they called you during COVID. It was fringe. They called you fringe, right?
Well, they called Jay Bhattacharya at Stanford fringe. Now, remember his colleague Scott Atlas from Stanford. I was at Baylor at the time. We were the two doctors who were invited to write op-eds in the Hill informing the House and the Senate and the White House about the pandemic. I mean, that's what I was doing in 2020. I was doing my role as a citizen. And, I published an op-ed in the Hill in August of 2020. I was the only public figure to call it. And I said, the great gamble of the COVID-19 vaccine development program. I thought it was going to fail just because you pointed out, even Fauci admits this, that, the vaccines for infectious respiratory viruses don't work too well. But I couldn't have anticipated how unsafe it was. I mean, I was just blown away when I found out that Pfizer knew about 1,223 deaths with Pfizer within 90 days of release of their shots. And they tried to bury it with the FDA. I was stunned.
So in 1986, they passed that Vax law, given immunity to pharmaceutical companies for vaccine injuries. And so when they did that, they had to narrow the list of injuries from certain vaccines that could qualify as compensatable vaccine injuries. And one of them was encephalitis from the MMR vaccine. And so by law, they were supposed to give all people who had encephalitis from the MMR vaccine compensation. So what they did was they redefined the brain damage as autism. Am I right on this? So they stopped calling it encephalitis and they started calling it autism. Am I close on this?
Well, a consequence of this kind of encephalitic picture could be autism, but you're right. The definitions were narrowed. This compensation was gamed so much. I told you about the polling incident where effectively parents were screwed when their kids had problems. And now listen to this. This is stunning. A paper by Miller has demonstrated that the vast majority of sudden infant deaths in a healthy, normal baby occur within a few days of getting a big battery of vaccines.
Yeah.
This is well, listen, there's a randomized trial showing in the hospital, if you give kids the battery of vaccines in the hospital, some of them have apnea, they stop breathing, and the nurses have to revive them. Well, that makes sense. If you get a big battery of shots at home and your child stops breathing and you're sleeping in the other room, that's a sudden death. And Burl Hamady, who's a representative in Louisiana, state rep, she proposed legislation that the vaccine record become part of the medical examination of a sudden infant death case. And you know what? The coroner said, we don't want to see the vaccines.
Yeah, I mean, that even in the Cutter incident, right, the government was warned that the polio vaccines were contaminated, but they went ahead with the program because they said it was urgent to get people vaccinated, and they didn't want to wait to make a clean batch. So they gagged the scientists who warned that they had polio viruses and later SV40 viruses, both of which turned into public health catastrophes. So this is repeating, just history repeats itself.
Right, history, and this is part of vaccine ideology. This is the central thesis, that mankind is vulnerable to infectious diseases. So there's a tremendous amount of fear. But through the brilliance of vaccinology, scientists like Anthony Fauci or Peter Hotez, these godlike figures, that they can improve upon God's creation through their brilliance. But because the vaccines aren't perfect, everyone must take them. And if some people are injured or disabled, or sadly, if they die along the way, they have to take it for the betterment of humanity.
Yeah.
That's the reason why there's no sorrow or remorse here. This is a religion. I'm telling you, this is a religion. And
it is the whole COVID thing became a religion for sure, and vaccines are a religion. It's not, science is all based on questioning. It's all based on skepticism, and you weren't allowed to do that. And that's what made it from science into a religion, because religion, it's called blasphemy if you question it and if you're skeptical of it. And in science, if you're skeptical of it and you criticize it, that's science. So they stopped people from doing science, and they really did turn it into a religion. And it's because if you don't have an experience of the divine, your psyche still has a need for that, right? And so they then created a god out of science. They turned science into a religion instead of what it's, and they turned people like Fauci. You go ahead,
Jimmy. Look at the coin on the front. I'll see if I can hold this up. The coin is a papal coin. This was issued by the Pope during the pandemic. It's a boy about to receive the Eucharist, the body and blood of Christ symbolically. But instead, he's receiving a COVID vaccine.
Wow.
This was issued by the Vatican. This is a 20 euro silver coin.
Wow.
I can tell you, in our book, we cite a church in the South Island of New Zealand. And it has a huge banner over the front of it. And it says, "Not even the blood of Jesus Christ will save you. Get vaccinated."
Oh, my God.
I'm telling you, Jimmy, it's a religion. It's irrational. And this irrational religion in the setting of the
he froze on
fear of the COVID-19 pandemic explains what we saw. And it's caused great harm. It happened during smallpox. Towards the end of the 19th century in Boston, in Toronto, in London, people were put in jail if they refused to take a smallpox vaccine. They were jailed. not just losing their jobs, they were put in jail. That's how bad it was. And all these things that have happened with vaccines over time, no one ever says they're sorry, ever.
Ever. No.
So what we've learned is that, listen, vaccines have done some good. We have fewer cases of measles. We have fewer cases of chickenpox. Polio is essentially out of the concern of worry. But each time for each one of these illnesses, we have other solutions. Polio, we've got a good water surveillance program. Diphtheria and pertussis, we have azithromycin that works great. We point out that other diseases for which there's no vaccine went away as well, like rheumatic fever and erysipelas and tuberculosis, because we came up with screening, detection, and treatment programs. So we should never think that vaccines saved lives. It's impossible for that to happen. That came up in my Senate testimony in May when they put up big posters, vaccines save lives. It's impossible. When you do the math, if you look at the number of deaths before these vaccines rolled out, there's no way they could have saved large numbers of lives. It's impossible. In fact, they're making a big deal about RFK and this measles outbreak in the United States, about 1,200 cases. Yeah. There's been a few deaths, and each one of them is because of inadequate treatment, not because of measles.
Yeah,
but do you know 1 year, I have a Substack on this, 1 year worldwide in the last few years, there were 600,000 cases.
Of measles.
600,000 cases. They don't vaccinate in a lot of Eastern Europe and a lot of the countries. So why are they making a big deal about 1,200 cases in the United States? Or when they were discussing RFK, this is how crazy the religion is. Sanjay Gupta, who's kind of my counterpart at CNN, and Anderson Cooper said, RFK is going to take away vaccines and polio is going to come back. And so they showed pictures of the iron lung. Like as if we get out the iron lung. I mean, we use mechanical ventilators now. Everyone knows that. It's not a matter of the iron lung. And not only that, but we've got good polio surveillance systems. And the injectable polio vaccine used currently is by my view pretty safe. So we're not going to have any resurgence of polio. People have lost their minds. I've met people who just think that RFK is going to ruin the world, and it's this irrational fear over infectious diseases.
So that brings me to the childhood vaccine schedule, and you talk about it. There's a steadily growing body of evidence that the childhood vaccination schedule, whose number of shots has greatly proliferated since 1986, has played a role in the dramatically spiking prevalence and incidence of autism since the early 1990s. According to the CDC estimates, a quarter of American children estimated to have autism spectrum disorder. Approximately 275,000 suffer from profound autism. This is a stupendous burden for our entire society, overwhelming family, schools, and health system. And it's useful to compare the 275,000 children suffering from profound autism to the 21,000 cases of paralytic poliomyelitis, which highly varying degrees of paralysis, much of which resolved or partly resolved over time, that were estimated to have occurred during the worst polio outbreak in history in 1952. So this polio outbreak was the subject of enormous media coverage that terrified most Americans, and yet, rationally evaluated, it is dwarfed by the public health catastrophe of profound autism, i.e. 275,000 American children requiring intense, around-the-clock care for the rest of their lives. Nevertheless, most of the medical profession insists that our greatest societal imperative is to adhere to the routine childhood vaccine schedule, no matter the consequences. I was at a Hollywood Christmas party last year, and there was a 72-year-old retired doctor, and he said, I'm worried about RFK Jr. taking away the vaccines. And I said, well, it's different than when we were kids. I go, now, some kids, it's up to 72 shots they get. And he said, what? 72? Like, he didn't know this. And I said, yeah, do you know the first vaccine they give a baby is the hepatitis vaccine? You only can catch hepatitis from intravenous drug use or unsafe sex. Why would you give that to a baby? And his mouth dropped. He go, they give that to a baby? Like, this was a doctor I was talking to in Hollywood who had no idea about any of it, but he did watch MSNBC, Rachel Maddow, tell him that RFK is going to take away life-saving vaccines. So just go ahead and speak to what you want about the childhood vaccine schedule, how we got here, and what should we do about it?
It's accelerated beyond belief. You know, the WHO has a program called Agenda 2030. They're actually aspiring to introduce 500 vaccines into use in underdeveloped countries. I mean, this is stunning. It's you can tell that this is now an irrational, delusional way of thinking, that we can just keep giving more and more and more. In the United States, around month 12 to 15, children are given 16 different shots at once. 16.
Wow.
Jimmy, if I prescribe 16 drugs to you all at once, I guarantee you're going to have a side effect. It's absolutely ludicrous to think that you can give 16 shots to a kid at once. And a lot of the products are in now, combined vaccines in a vial. But our CDC is telling us that about 3 to 4% of children now have a febrile seizure. They get so sick, the fever goes to 104, and they have a seizure. Well, the leading cause of febrile seizures is getting a big battery of vaccines. Some kids get really sick. And then a critical paper by Nicholson and colleagues from Sweden demonstrated that if a child gets a febrile seizure, if it happens, 40% of the time they end up with a neuropsychiatric disorder, which is attention deficit disorder, autism, various forms of tics or motor problems, and epilepsy or seizures. It's catastrophic. And so the numbers add up. And I presented at the Autism Summit this year, and I'm an epidemiologist. I study, illnesses and why they occur. And I said, listen, there's risk factors for autism. We can go through them. There are some common genetic variants, but the genetics don't change in populations that rapidly. When you and I were kids, it was 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 31. I mean, this is epidemic proportions. Having children at an older age, women over 35, men over 40, and then premature delivery, delivering a baby before 37 weeks. A leading cause of premature delivery, ironically, is giving vaccines to pregnant women and causing a fever and having them either lose the baby or have premature baby. It's actually in the package insert, for instance, of the RSV vaccine. So, well, this could prompt premature delivery. And so the big risk factor on top of those must be combination vaccination. And I say risk factor, not a direct cause, but risk factor, because we were able to identify a case of autism long before the vaccine. So it's possible it can happen. But the vaccines appear to be very strongly related. There's 6 studies, by the way, a recent one by Mawson and colleagues from the Florida Medicaid system, showing that children who take no shots now, which is now a growing number of kids in the United States, much lower rates of all these neuropsychiatric problems, much lower. The Amish and Mennonites, they haven't taken vaccines, for generations. And, they're free of not only their neuropsychiatric diseases, but also allergic diseases like food allergies, asthma, atopic dermatitis.
So, the official rationale for giving a baby hepatitis B shot is that the mother could have hepatitis B, and that if you give that vaccine in the first 48 hours of life, it reduces the risk of the baby catching it from his mother. But the issue is that they just test the mother to see if she has hepatitis B, right?
Right. So mothers are routinely tested. And this giving the hepatitis B shot so early in life, by the time the kids need protection with having sex or drug use or something later on, or being a paramedic or a nurse or a doctor, I think that's a good application of it. They don't have protection. So the hepatitis B vaccine is a reasonably good vaccine. It's just given at the wrong time. We don't need to blast the little kids. Wait till you go to medical school or nursing school.
Okay, and of course, we're not saying that that vaccines. We're saying everything needs to be studied, just like RFK says. We need good data because they never did placebo-controlled studies for these new vaccines. That's the big problem. They've tested them against other vaccines. They've never tested them when they give them all at once, like you were talking about 16.
Right.
Am I right about that?
Right. So they've never been tested in these big bundles. There's been a few examinations of the MMR vaccine, and there's been quick declarations. I saw Senator Bill Cassidy do this. Well, the MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. Well, he's citing studies that they don't have a clean delineation in the group that they say were unvaccinated. In fact, they got vaccines, and that was from Denmark. And so none of these studies are sufficiently convincing that, they don't rule out autism at all. And it is also ridiculous to hear people say that the cause of autism is unknown, but we know it's not the vaccine.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Sanjay Gupta says that.
Yeah.
When you don't know what causes something, you can't just grab whatever your sacred cow is. Vacca or vaccines means cow. You can't grab the sacred cow and say, okay, it's exonerated.
So, the COVID, do you think there was a big overreach with COVID? Because they were still up until 5 seconds ago telling everybody to get their booster, and you were supposed to be on number 12. And most of the country stopped doing that. At some point, 85% of the country, or even greater number, maybe 90% of the country, decided to do their own research and be skeptical of what they were being told by the government, the CDC and the FDA and the TV news, which is all bought by Big Pharma. They decided to think for themselves and stop taking the recommendation to get boosted for the COVID vaccine. So do you think that actually is a positive, in a sense, that people are now finally having healthy skepticism about what they're being told about vaccines?
For sure. Skepticism is the lifeblood of science. People should be asking questions. You're right. America figured this out. We didn't need to have press conferences on that. They saw their family members having trouble with the vaccines. And, my office is filled every day with vaccine heart damage, blood clots, and other problems. I mean, it's obvious. It's painfully obvious. And what happened over time is that the public dropped the vaccines. Now, recently, the FDA, Makary and Prasad's now left under RFK, they published a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine saying, well, we should restrict it some, maybe not healthy pregnant women and babies, but they still concluded 33% of the country should be taking a booster. And, the CDC quit telling us how many people took shots. They now just give a survey. They ask people, are you going to take a shot? Well, yeah, I am. And that's how they count it. So they actually don't have the direct records from CVS and Walgreens. My estimation is under 5% of people are taking shots. I mean, Jimmy, do you know anybody who's going to take a booster this fall?
I don't know anybody. Oh, you know what? I do know someone. Yeah, I know someone, and that's a sad person. Yes. I mean, I live in Hollywood, doctor. There's a bunch of people not thinking.
Right. But people should think, 8 shots. I mean, this is unprecedented. Biden, he took 6 shots publicly. And, he developed 2 problems that could be related to the vaccines. One, he developed a blend of Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, which is a classic for the vaccines. There was a large Korean study that showed that. So it's not classic Parkinson's, not classic Alzheimer's, but it's a blend. He clearly has that. And the other thing he had is what we call turbo cancer. Now, his doctor's not talking about this. He pled the fifth recently, O'Connor did. But come on, you're president of the United States and they're not doing a PSA or a digital rectal exam, prostate exam, and Biden has prostate cancer outside the prostatic capsule, into the pelvis and up the spine. That's turbo cancer. I'll tell you another person who has turbo cancer, Deion Sanders, big time. I've never seen somebody in their 50s need to have their bladder taken out. Now remember, Deion Sanders was pushing the vaccines. He was trying to shame Aaron Rodgers to take the vaccine. And Deion Sanders develops vaccine blood clots, and he has to have multiple amputations. And he does a docuseries. He never mentions the vaccines, and it's so obvious because he was predisposed to some vascular problems. And now this prostate cancer. Deion Sanders had plenty of abdominal pelvic CTs. He didn't have bladder cancer 5 years ago. This came up on him quick, and he's now had his bladder removed. He's going to be dealing with some type of bag on the sidelines. I mean, it's amazing. The vaccine religion clouds people's eyes from seeing what the vaccine has done to them.
So you talk about turbo cancers. Let me play this this little video. Here is Cheryl Atkinson interviewing. Is it Mike McKernan? Anyway, here, let's listen to what he has to say.
So what should people be concerned about with what you found? If someone's had COVID vaccines, what would be their concern?
I would keep an eye on if any of your family members come down with an unexplained cancer, get a pathologist involved to get a slide or a sample so that the people who are studying this can begin to look for whether there's vaccine sequence in there. So we have a person who had 4 Pfizer vaccines, and then a year after that came down with a colon cancer, and there were 3 biopsies taken, 2 before death and 1 after. The person died of this diagnosis within 30 days. Those samples were then, we used a tool called PCR to look for the Pfizer's vaccine sequence, and then resorted to a process known as Illumina sequencing to sequence the tissue to see if there's any Pfizer sequence in there, and there is. And shockingly, there's a lot of it, and that was not expected. The only way that happens is if it got into the cells and amplified and started replicating.
Does it imply that it caused the cancer, or just the fact that it was present in the cancer is concerning because it's in the body?
Yes, that's a good question. We can't nail causality from the data we have, but it is certainly a concern when you see a sequence like that. So there are mechanisms where this could be playing a role in cancer. So the reason we'd like to get this message out is that I think too many of these tumor biopsies are getting thrown away and the evidence is disappearing. And it's important for folks going through that process to try to retain the biopsies if they can so that we can go back and see if this is in fact the case.
So what does he mean by that? If there's traces of the vaccine in the cancer, what kind of traces?
He's actually finding the vaccine inside the cancer cells. And on my Substack today, one of our Japanese colleagues, disclosed his histopathology in a tweet. He says, I've got cancer and the vaccine is right in my cancer cells. And there was a paper by Anguis and Bustos pointing out, what's called the multi-hit hypothesis of vaccine, promoting cancer. And it's clear multiple mechanisms exist. The vaccines were bad enough because the FDA says they cause heart damage and the FDA says they cause blood clots. That's for sure. I just can't believe that it looks like they cause cancer. Or if they don't directly cause cancer, they're accelerating the cancer. It's called turbo cancer. And so the commonest cancers right now, there's my Substack, I think it'll be out in 2 days, is the National Cancer Report 2025. The 2 most common cancers, which are prostate in men and breast in women, those are 2 big ticket cancers. They are markedly up since mass vaccination.
So the thing is, though, about the turbo cancers is that they were supposed to test for genotoxicity, right? But Pfizer opted out of it because the vaccines couldn't cause that, they said. And the regulators let them pass on not doing cancer testing, even though it was required for gene therapies. Are you aware of that?
No, you're right. Actually, everything was skipped. So there was no pharmacokinetics, no pharmacodynamics. No one knew how long the synthetic messenger RNA would stay in the body. No one knew because that was all skipped. There was no carcinogenicity studies, no teratogenicity studies. Do they cause birth defects? And there was no genotoxicity studies. Now we have abundant evidence from Neo7 Bioscience, a great company publishing with John Cantazzaro. It looks like for sure in some people, Pfizer Moderna gets into the human genome. And it's not just the code for Pfizer Moderna, but there's actually little DNA fragments that come off these plasmids where they're making the messenger RNA. And they're fragments for SV40, the promoter, the inhibitor, and the origin of insertion, fragments for antibiotic resistance genes, and now sadly, little fragments for spike. And we can see that I have some patients myself that have had these advanced tests done, and we can see all of this. It's honestly, it's a genetic nightmare. And no surprise, Kennedy shut down 22 of these programs that between the government and Sanofi and Moderna and Pfizer and AstraZeneca. We had to shut them down. It's just the messenger RNA platform looks like it's not going to be safe for vaccination.
Well, they never, before COVID, they had tried, correct me if I'm wrong, but every time they tried an mRNA platform, it didn't work. And so they had to abandon it. But then when COVID came along, they just rushed it through. Am I wrong about that?
Well, this is what happened. You're right. Before the pandemic, messenger RNA has been around since 1985. It's not a new technology. But typically it would be injected and then the body would break it down. Okay. And you try to make a anti-cancer protein or try to make insulin or make a deficient enzyme like alpha-galactosidase. But what happened was Carrico and Wiseman were working on a process to make messenger RNA be permanent in the body, and it's called pseudo-uridination. They won the Nobel Prize for this, if you can imagine this. And then Pfizer and Moderna, in their development program, they tried, pseudo-uridinating, X% of the residues, and then they finally got to the point and said, listen, let's do the entire thing. Let's go full synthetic for Pfizer and Moderna. That's what they did. And now it's injected into the body, and there's no way for the body to break this stuff down.
Okay. Well, everybody should check out your new book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. Whenever you read something about vaccines, it's always mind-blowing. And it's mind-blowing of the cover-up that's happened. It's mind-blowing of the brushing under, the censorship that's happened, the punishing of doctors who have healthy skepticism. It is just, and I mean, it goes all the way back to the first vaccine, and it doesn't stop. And so I recommend everybody get your book, Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology, and Reality. And I appreciate you coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to tell
Jimmy,
our audience?
I want to end with some hope. I could tell in your voice it was kind of a downer towards the end here. At the Wellness Company, we've innovated. We have multiple peer-reviewed publications. Everybody who takes these shots should be on the ultimate spike detox from the Wellness Company. This is the only scientifically supported approach to clear the vaccine spike protein out of the body, which is the major driver of harm. And ultimate spike detox for a year or more. Follow the directions on the bottle. It's copyrighted McCullough protocol-based spike protein detoxification. The other thing, Jimmy, is important is the messenger RNA has been found in breast milk. That's a horrifying thought. Okay, but listen to this. Breast milk is modified sweat, and the messenger RNA must be coming out in sweat. So I tell my patients, listen, I'm in Texas here, get outside, sweat when you work out, go in a hot sauna, for an hour, just make sure you keep up in your hydration and sweat this stuff out of your body. My recent patient I sent skin biopsies to in the German lab, he had messenger RNA in his skin, so I know it comes out in sweat. So I think there is a hope of getting the vaccine out of the body. And for sure, we've demonstrated you can get the spike protein out of the body. So go to Wellness Company, Ultimate Spike Detox, follow the directions on the bottle. It's a very constructive step. I've never had a patient develop a new blood clot or cardiac arrest or even develop a new cancer once they're on the detox.
Well, I've been trying to fight the spike protein since I got it in my body in April of 2021, I guess that was when I got it. And I've been taking nattokinase and ivermectin. I took fluvoxamine for a little while. I had a occipital neuralgia. That seems to be gone. It comes back every once in a while. Feels like I have an earache, but that's not what it is.
Right. But Jimmy, listen, the ultimate spike detox is now very high dose medicinal grade nattokinase, bromelain, curcumin, and multiple minor ingredients. So I think you really have to kind of upgrade to the Wellness Company Ultimate Spike Detox. It's far and away the best in class. I've had some patients now, and I've published this in the peer-reviewed literature, massively drop their spike levels now, massively.
Okay.
And I did it myself. I didn't take the shots, but I had COVID multiple times, and I got to the point where I was having side effects from that, and I watched it in myself drop, and I feel so much better, and I'm so happy I did it, and it's safe, and I really think you should upgrade to Wellness Company Ultimate Spike Detox.
Okay, Dr. Peter McCullough, congrats on the new book, and thanks again for coming on, and thanks for sticking your chin out and having the courage to push back against the establishment and help people instead of infecting people. I really appreciate everything you do.
Thank you.
Okay. Come see us on tour in Rutherford, New Jersey, New York, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Appleton, Wisconsin, Rosemont, Chicago, Louisville, Kentucky, and Fort Wayne, Indiana. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.